This is the Canon XF605. Here we have our lens with our lens hood, and it's in closed position for the lens cover. We want it in open position to shoot, and then when we're done, to protect it from any dust or debris, back to our closed position. Here we have our focus, zoom, and iris ring. Here is our ND filter. So you could increase the ND filter using the plus button and the minus button to remove ND. ND filter is when you have too much light coming in, like if you're outdoors and you have a lot of sunlight, you'd want to bring the ND filter up. However, if you don't need it, you don't want to compete against it with all your other settings, so you need to make sure your ND filter is off. So you want to do that before shooting by pressing the minus button and checking in your viewfinder within the status of the ND. It should say that ND is off. Now we have our push AF MF for autofocus, manual focus. Focus is manual and switch to auto. I would say keep it in auto, especially if you're doing run and gun. If you're doing a lockdown shot or rack focus, set it to manual. Iris is manual and auto switch. Let's keep it in auto if we're doing run and gun, and manual if you want that precision control over it. For zoom, this is choice. There's ring or rocker. I prefer rocker. That's by the handle you can adjust whether you're going wide or telephoto rather than using the ring. When you use the ring, I find that if you happen to touch by the lens, you might get a little camera shake. So, however, there are people who can use the ring with great success, and it works very quickly and precise if you know that tactile control and can do it without introducing camera shake. Here we have push auto iris, and you push it once if you're in manual, and it would switch it to auto iris setting. It would set all the settings as if you had it on auto, but very quickly. So if you're in one location and you're moving to another location and you're in manual, but you need that quick change, push auto iris is your answer. Then we have powered IS for a powered image stabilizer. Peaking. Peaking is a setting that will give you an outline for what's in critical focus. So whatever's in focus will have an outline. You can set that outline color within the menu system to yellow, red, white. Then we have zebra. Zebra lets you know where you might be overexposed. So that'll show up as diagonal lines. And again, you could calibrate at what level of intensity within the menu system. Then we have WFM for wave field monitor. That'll toggle so you could see, the various monitors and scopes for your color and exposure. Now we have our full auto. Always make sure this is off. If you're in full auto, it's going to also include auto gain control, which will automatically increase the gain. When you increase gain, you also increase noise to the image. So I prefer to have full auto off and auto gain control off at all times. Then we have auto white balance. The white balance on this camera is pretty good. Again, if you're running and gunning from one location to another and you're moving through various lighting situations where the white balance can shift, auto white balance is good to have on. If you want more control over your situation or trying to do something specific in camera with white balance, set it to manual. And then down here we have our white balance controls. So here is where we would set our manual white balance, and then we have our A, B, and preset. So you could have two settings, A and B, for white balance, and then toggle through the presets within the menu system. Here we have ISO gain. So L is always set to 0 dB. Keep it at L. I mentioned this earlier with the auto gain control. The more gain you introduce, the more noise you'll introduce to your image. And you'll notice if you look at your footage, it might look fine on screen, but if you look at your footage blown up, you might notice inconsistencies when you've introduced gain from shot to shot. Here we have shutter and our key lock. Key lock is have it set to unlock. That way you could adjust your settings, and then if you wanted to make sure that you didn't accidentally make any changes, you'd switch it to lock. However, if you switch it over to lock, be aware that you might be trying to hit buttons and things aren't working. You'll just have to remember to switch it back again to unlock to make those changes. And here we have our audio settings. It's protected behind this little door. We have our audio, auto, and manual, auto, and manual. Auto is good if you're using the camera mic, doing some observational footage, and you don't have any external mics, and you have no other sound source, and you're going to be traveling through various situations. However, whenever we have automatic, it's always seeking for a sound whenever there's silence. So if you're doing an interview with someone and it's set to auto, then as soon as they stop speaking, then it's going to increase the dB. You'll start hearing the sound of the room itself increase, such as ventilation, if there's a refrigerator, electricity, 60 cycle hum, those type of things that you'll pick up. Okay. And then manual, you would adjust here. Depending on your situation for your mic, some microphones, like lavalier sets, will have different adjustments for the transmitter and receiver for wireless systems, where you could adjust the levels on those too. So you just need to make sure within your signal flow, you're adjusting all the settings properly and it's balanced, and you don't have one level that's too high, because if you set this to 5 or 10 and you're compensating for something earlier in the signal chain, then you're introducing noise or distortion. Okay, so on the top here we have the media button. So the media button lets you toggle between playback and camera, and then we have our on-off switch. So whenever powering up, you want to press in the green and switch over to on, and you'll see that green light indicate that it's powered on. Here we have our headphones. So I strongly recommend having headphones plugged in, even if you're not using a microphone, just to get a clean sound of what you're hearing. If you just trust the VU meters, you might be getting good levels, but you might be getting some garbage sound that's being picked up. This is the back of the Canon XF605. Here we have SD card slot A and SD card slot B. It's push to eject, and we have a slot select button right here, so you could choose between A and B when recording. We'll close that up. It cannot record if the back door is open, so make sure that you close that. Here we have our battery. The Canon batteries have an LED readout for the percentage of battery power. You push in, and here we can see we're at 50%. Here we have our viewfinder. You can look in, and based on the default setting, if you look in the viewfinder, there's an indicator there that will then switch from the LCD monitor to the viewfinder. Underneath, we can adjust the focus of the diopter to your vision. So make sure that any text appears clear so you know that your shot is in focus. Here we have various connectors all covered. We have USB, we have HDMI. Our HDMI, I will plug in now. And that will give us a feed out to our menu system, which we'll be covering in a moment. And then here we have DC in, so if you want to go powered off the adapter, you plug in your power there. And various timecode SDI and sync genlock. Okay, and then remote B. So those are all the connections and everything that's on the back of the camera. Here we have our zoom rocker. We have input 1 and input 2 for XLR. If I turn this slightly, we could see we have our record button. We also have menu control dial right there. And over here, behind the XLR inputs, we have our mic line and mic plus 48V switches. So this is to set input 1, this is to set input 2 for audio in. Mic plus 48V is phantom power, so if you're coming off of a camera that uses phantom power, it will pull power from the camera battery. By default, you should set these to mic. Line in is if you're coming off a board. And here we have the top of the Canon XF605. Here we have our menu button, cancel, and joystick. The joystick, you could navigate by moving it up, down, left, right, and by pushing into the joystick, it's a button push, and that acts as a selection. Here we see we have the rocker, T for telephoto, W for wide. We have a record button up here with a record lock and image magnification. Here we get a better view of the rocker. We could see that we also have image magnification and a button to preview the previous shot that you've done. Here we have shoes on top of the camera if you were going to be mounting a microphone, a light, or a monitor. Now, if you remember from earlier, we have our menu button here. This can be controlled when we go to the viewfinder and we navigate using this joystick. Again, up, down, left, right for navigation, and pressing in to make a selection. Okay, now we're going to go into the Canon's menu system. The first thing I want you to do is go in the third icon, Recording Media Setup. At the very top, we have Initialize Media. Here it shows us what media is in the slots, slot A and slot B. Here it sees that we have an SD card in slot A, and we could select in and press OK. Now remember, before hitting OK, you need to make sure this is either a fresh card or all your media has been transferred off your card and backed up. If you haven't done that yet, you need to do that before you hit initialize. It erases everything on the card, formatting it fresh for shooting more projects. Okay. And we hit menu again. And now we hit back. We want to be able to build up from scratch. And how we do that is we go into the menu system under System Setup and Reset. Here we have Reset selected right at the top. We press in and we want to make sure we set it to all settings. So we select in and set and we click OK. That's going to restore it back to the factory default settings and we'll build up our settings from there. So just to expedite this, I am just going to move over to Set and then jump into our menu and point out some crucial settings that we need to do here. First and foremost, what we want to do is go into our main record format. And here, and we want to change this to MPEG-4 HEVC. That's 422 10-bit. It's a second option. So this is going to give you a much more robust color depth. So when it comes to color grading, you could pull out details that may not have been, in the what you see is what you get version when you look at the screen. Next, our main resolution. Here it's 4K. We're going to go to HD. 4K requires a lot of processing, and unless you have a project in mind that requires 4K, then 1080 is a good starting point. And then frame rate. This is subjective, but for this project, what we'll do is we'll set this to 59.94p. That's progressive. So we have our settings, and again, this is under the first page of the recording menu, the recording media setup. Next, we want to go to custom picture. So by default, it's 709 normal, so standard broadcast. And to give it a little bit more latitude, I recommend for beginning to set it to wide dynamic range. So that way you could play with dynamic range a little bit more than just your standard 709. However, if you know for your project you're going to be going into color grading, you would set it to C-Log3, Canon Log 3. Now, from there, we'll go to our assistance functions. So here we have focus guide, we have peaking, we have magnification, we have false color, zebras, waveform monitors, markers, and here I want you to go to grid marker. Now under grid marker, if you go to white, you have other options for color settings. Gray is, not as contrasty, so you might prefer gray over white. But this will give you the rule of thirds framing. So when you come back out, you'll see that we have our rule of thirds. Okay, next in the menu, I'm going over to our audio input selection. So for audio input selection, we want to go to our first option, and we want to make sure that we're using built-in microphone if we haven't connected anything XLR. So if you use built-in microphone, then you're going to use the microphones that are on the physical camera itself. If you happen to put in external microphones, you want to switch that to input terminals, and that would be input 1 and input 2 on the side of the camera. Those are XLR inputs, and you could set it like so. And then we have the mic terminal, which is another mic input. So built-in mic for starters, and then as you move in to using external microphones, input terminals. So now we're going to take a look at our audio settings. So here we have A for auto for channel 1 and channel 2. Channel 1 corresponds to the left signal if you're listening on the headphone, and channel 2 to the right signal. If it's built-in microphone, it's going to be that input for channel 1 and channel 2. If you're coming in from external microphones, it would be input 1 physically connected over XLR and input 2 physically connected. So you could control them independently of one another. If you have two subjects that you're interviewing, or an interviewee and a host or interviewer, you can set those separate. If someone's speaking softly, you can raise the level manually, and if someone is speaking loud, you could drop them down independent of one another. It's very important to have your headphones connected when you're doing this, so always have your headphones on to make sure that no matter what the VU meter says, you know you're getting clean sound. Next, we have our audio status. So we press that in and we get a better view of our VU meter. We could see where we're hitting as far as dB. So the sweet spot is about -10, -12 dB is where you should be hitting when your subject is speaking or in general. If you're too hot and you go into the red, you're closer to 0, it's going to start clipping and distorting. If you're too low, then when you raise it up in post-production, you're going to be introducing a little bit of noise as you raise it. Depending on how low your signal is how much noise you're going to introduce. So if you're just starting out, I recommend setting these to auto, and that will automatically ride your levels. However, if you're interviewing someone, if you have it set to auto, then once they start speaking, the levels are going to start seeking out other sounds. So it's going to raise the levels until it starts hearing the sound of the room, the radiator, a refrigerator, a lot of unwanted sounds. And then you'd have to ride those levels in post-production to lower them and remove them. That's why professionally, you want to set it to manual if you're in a controlled situation, auto for observational, and just general usage. And finally, we're going to take a look at taking off the battery and charging it at the end of a shoot. The battery should get about 2 to 3 hours for the standard BP A30 batteries, and that varies with how you're using the camera. If you have the LED screen on, if you have various things, phantom power, that is going to affect it. So we put our batteries on by pushing in, make sure it's flush with the top of the camera, it's pin side in, and we release it by pushing the button. This is a release button right below the viewfinder, tucked in. We push that in and release. And here we could see that the battery has contacts, and here are the contacts, and you should be clicking that into place. Never force any batteries or any media, anything that has rails, if it doesn't feel like it's going in right. Brute force will destroy equipment, but gently reseating it to where you catch the threading or the rails will help with the longevity of your equipment and prevent any damage. So here we have our battery charger connected to our power adapter, and just like the back of the camera, we want to make sure that we're catching the threading properly, it's seated properly, and it snaps into place. And it'll be charging. Give it a 2-hour charge before your next usage. That should be a full charge. You can always check with the indicator what power you're at. And if you are sharing the equipment with someone else, it's good practice to make sure your batteries are charged before handing it out to someone else. And that concludes our overview for the Canon 605 camera.